Hey guys, today I'm going to show you how to start your own podcast in 10 simple yet detailed steps. I'm going to show you step by step what I did to launch my podcast. Specifically, I'll tell you how to plan your podcast, create a brand, record your podcast, publish your podcast, and market your podcast. So if that sounds interesting to you, whether you started a podcast before, you're a seasoned podcaster, whether you're a brand new, stick around and I'm sure you'll learn a lot. So my name is Victor Sasanya and I'm the founder and the host of The Valuable Podcast, a podcast where I sit down with highly valued individuals from a range of different industries discussing their compelling journey to becoming valuable. So step number one, you want to find your why. Why is it that you want to create a podcast? I think this is the very, very basic but number one step, because there's so many different reasons why you can start a podcast, but when you know your why from the beginning, then you'll basically last a bit longer, because on average stats say that people who start podcasts don't last around 3 episodes. So if you want to last, then have a good why. And there's many different reasons why you can start a podcast. So some people start a podcast because it's for fun. Some people start it because it's a hobby. They like to talk. They also have something to share. They want to put out something to the world. Some people start it to build their network. For example, my podcast, I speak to lots of interesting guests, and subconsciously, I'm building my network. I speak to lots of different people. They recommend me other people, and I'm just building a network of people who are highly valued, right? You might want to start a podcast as a potential source of income. There is some sort of money in podcasting, which I'll get onto later on in the video. But yeah, this can be another stream of income. But whatever it is, figure out your why. Specifically, my why, I started my podcast, The Valuable Podcast, because I used to get lots of questions such as, how did you do this? How did you do that? People used to ask me career related stuff. People used to ask me for advice. And I remember just thinking, like, most of the tips and information, whether it was personal development, whether it was career wise, all that success, if you want to call it, that sort of amass, came from having conversations. And it came from, getting certain pieces of information from different people and like piecing it together like a puzzle. So I thought, hold on a second, what if I just open up these backdoor conversations to the world in terms of a podcast, sit down with highly valued people I talk to on a regular day, but just record it, put it out there for you guys to listen. If it's of value to you, I've done what I wanted to do. It's quite fun, it's a hobby, I like doing it. So that was my why. I found my why of why I wanted to start a podcast. And when I understood, okay, what's the purpose of this, is to put out great information, valuable information people can listen to, use in order to change the trajectory of sort of their life path. It was a win-win situation for me. Now, that's my why. You guys need to find your why. And a couple questions that I used to ask myself to find my why was, number one, what do I love talking about? Number two, what do people want to hear me talk about? Number three, is there a gap in the podcasting market for it? And if you ask yourself these questions and you find something that you want to talk about, or you find sort of that why you're doing what you're doing, perfectly fine. As long as it overlaps, then you're onto something. Next, you want to identify your audience. So you've got your why, you know why you want to start the podcast, but who's going to listen to it? You must have an audience. And your audience is basically many people who are your ideal listeners. And now you might not have an audience, or you might already have an audience. And with podcasting, most successful podcasts, they already have an audience. So it's just like another medium that people rush to listen to their favorite sort of people for information, for advice, or whatever the podcast is about. But if you don't have an audience, please don't fret, because you can go and find your audience. You can build your audience from scratch. And that starts with looking for your ideal listeners. You need to basically describe your ideal listener, because this is exactly what I do. Meaning, who is it that's going to listen to your podcast? Where do you want your podcast to be situated? Who are the listeners? And you need to come up with like a profile description. Imagine you're doing, speed dating or something. You have to write a bio about yourself or the potential type of person you're looking for. Think about that when you're looking for an audience to listen to your podcast. That's what I did. And I'll actually show you on the screen. It's a bit embarrassing, but when I made my first sort of ideal listener, I wrote paragraphs about them. I wrote paragraphs about them of who they are, the age they're at, what they're doing, what they like to do, what are their pain points, etc. And to figure out how would they listen to my podcast. And if you can read it right here on the screen, you will see that too. So you need to come up with your own structure a profile of who are your ideal listeners and would they listen to my podcast. When you've understand who your ideal listener is, now you can actually go out and build a podcast that they want to listen to. So this is when you actually plan the type of podcast show that you're going to host or that you're going to run. There's so many different types of podcast shows. So number one, you got like a guest interview style podcast show like myself. Number two, you can have a solo show where it's just you speaking. Number three, you can have a show which is you have a co-host. You might have multiple co-hosts, 2, 3 or 4. You can have a podcast that's sort of like a news flash. So 5-minute podcast just telling you about the recent news. There's so many different things you can do with podcasting. You can have a podcast with a comedian, have stand-up jokes, but you get the gist. You're gonna find out, I've got my why, I've got my audience, but what kind of show do they want to listen to? And this is your job to figure out the format of your show in order to reach and satisfy the needs of your audience. Once you figure out the type or the format of your show, so it's just very, very simple. What type of show am I going to run? Then you want to basically hold yourself accountable and set an official launch date. Literally, this is exactly what I done. Bear in mind, I haven't bought no equipment, I haven't done none of that. I just thought about why I want to start a podcast, my audience, the type of show. Then I said, okay, listen, my podcast is going to launch on the 1st of January, and that was it. So you want to hold yourself accountable, set an official date, write it down in bold, wherever it is, whether it's big on a whiteboard, it's on paper, it's in your phone screensaver. It doesn't matter. Just write down a date that you are going to launch your podcast, because it adds to the excitement. It makes sure that you have something that you're working towards to publish, whether that's a full episode or a trailer. Just make sure that you can have a date that you know you're going to release your podcast into the world. So next, you want to set a consistent routine for publishing. When are you going to publish your episodes? Is it going to be on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Friday, on a weekend? Are you going to publish once a week, twice a week? Is it going to be a daily publish? Think about these things, and the way to think about it is, again, when does your audience want to hear this and when are they most likely to listen to it? So I post on a Monday morning at 5 a.m. weekly, and I also segment my sort of episodes into seasons. So I posted season 1, and I know that's going to comprise of 10 different episodes. Then I post weekly, so I post on a Monday, 5 a.m. Every week you can expect a new episode. The reason I do that, because my audience, I know that a lot of them are young professionals, so graduates, they're on their way to work in the morning, so having a podcast to listen to as soon as they wake up or when they're on the train or when they're driving is amazing, because they can consume my content at the start of the week on a Monday, and it gives them like an energy boost, motivational boost. It gives them some inspiration as well as information that they can sort of act on in their career, in their job, and in their daily lives. So that's the reason I post on a Monday at 5 a.m. and you need to find out what times you're going to post and how frequently you're going to post, and whether you might not do it in seasons. You might want to post ad hoc because you don't want it so structured. It just might be, again, a hobby. That's completely fine, as long as you know that it's an ad hoc thing. Tell your audience, like, you might post on a Wednesday, you might post on a Sunday in the next 3 weeks, and you might post 3 episodes in the same week. That's completely fine, as long as it suits what you want to do and what your audience will probably like as well, to keep those listeners consistent. Next, you want to draw a template for your actual show. So you understand and you got when you're going to publish, the times, the days, how frequent, but now you need a bit of a template. So what is your show going to look like, in the sense that, is it going to have a quiz at the start of it? Are you going to have a Q&A section from the audience? Is it going to be where you have like an introduction to a story? Is it a storytelling podcast? These are lots of different things that I thought about before starting my podcast, and I thought about, okay, I need to basically come up with some sort of show or template that I can follow each guest I interview, which is important, right? Because I want there to be some sort of consistency. So I thought about my show template went a bit like this. Introduction, where I basically get my guests feeling a bit warm, they feel welcome, they feel comfortable speaking. So we talk about just their background, so their early background, sort of where they grew up, where they lived, what was it like, sort of schooling, just to ease into the conversation. Then I normally hit straight away on some of the crucial information I think my listeners want to hear. So I'll touch on something like, oh, you know, I read this, or I see that you've been awarded this, or I'll literally just touch on what they do currently, so make it very topical. And you might have a completely different podcast where it's just a solo podcast, but whatever it is, template. What is it that listeners can come every single week or however frequent you post and they can expect something, right? Because I think we live in a world right now, there are high expectations of a lot of different people. Not to say that you need to fulfill everybody's expectations, but if you're going to start a podcast, just let your listeners know what to expect. And I think a consistent format of a template of a show, whatever show that is, it will be really, really helpful in order to, one, you plan and actually record the podcast, two, the listeners engage and leave with great substance. This is not necessary, but you can also have an intro and an outro if you want. It adds a nice ring to some podcasts, but again, it's not necessary. But what I would recommend is, whilst you're planning the template of your show, do plan the show notes. A lot of people skip over this. So show notes are basically what appears under your podcast in major platforms such as Spotify, Apple. So when someone clicks on your podcast, they'll see a description, that's for one, of what the podcast is about. And when they click on the episode, they'll see show notes. So show notes should contain a podcast summary. It should contain a bio if you have a guest, or a bio about yourself. And most importantly, it should contain timestamps. So timestamps are basically at what time, what are you speaking about at what point in time. So if someone did want to quickly find something, whether they're listening again, they wanted to find when you spoke about something in particular, they could just go to 4 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And it's really useful for somebody that never come across your podcast before, but they have timestamps. I'm like, oh wow, I mean, this is something clearly I want to listen to. Then they click play, and you can add in all sorts of links, whether you have a website, social media, whether you have a sponsor. So I think show notes are really important. And again, I have a template, so I always do the podcast summary, then I'll do a bio, then I'll do timestamps, then I'll do a CTA, also known as a call to action, to sign up to my mailing list or click on this, etc. I'll put in some links. Then last but not least, I'll put in my social media. But again, very, very useful to actually plan some templates for your show notes. And a quick tip, which is actually quite useful, is splitting up your podcast into pre-roll, mid-roll and post-roll, little like 20-second segments where you might want to shout out something, whether that's a website of yours, a social media, whether that's announcing an event, a sponsor. It's just really useful and it's good practice. And you don't need to be like, okay, stop, I'm about to announce this. Just make it flow, just put it in. I normally talk about my newsletter, sign up to my mailing list when I think is appropriate, but I know that I do it whether it's at the beginning, in the middle, a bit at the end. So I think that's a useful tip that you guys can also use to format and template your show. The next step in planning your podcast is actually creating a brand. So when you launch your podcast, you obviously want a brand behind it. And we haven't even got to this bit, which is so essential. What are you going to call your podcast? What are you going to name your podcast and why? Now, this will be actually part of the brand. This is where you can think about, okay, what brand do I want to create? How do I want people to feel when they listen to my podcast? Because this will all add to the brand and will add to how you want your podcast perceived. And when you think about how do I want people to feel, and what are the emotions I want people to go through, you can actually attach all of these answers to building a brand that actually represents what you're about and what your podcast is about. Whether that's the fancy stuff people see, like the colors, the font, the logos, etc. These are the questions that you want answered first. So when you thought about these questions, such as what is the type of emotions and what do I want my brand to represent, then go out there and actually make it. And the most important thing is actually building a podcast cover art. Again, a lot of people overlook this, but if you're launching a podcast, how are people going to discover your podcast? We'll talk about social media later, but again, the most important thing is sort of having a very eye-catching, great podcast cover art. So this is what people see when they go into Spotify or Apple Podcasts or whatever platform they're streaming your podcast. Again, this is depending on if you are publishing it on these major platforms and you're not just using YouTube. If you're just using YouTube, maybe podcast cover art is not that essential. But if you're going to publish your podcast on major platforms, then please focus a bit on your podcast cover art. So when I was designing my podcast cover art, the one thing I recommend you guys do is think of 5 different podcasts, or okay, 3, but 5 would be good, but minimum 3 different podcasts, and go to their cover art and write down why you like it, what is it about it that caught your eye, what do they use, fonts, colors. So that's exactly what I did. So I knew that the type of podcast I wanted to release, again, it's about me, I'm the host, right? So it needed to be centered around myself, and it needed to have brand colors that really attracted people. So I used these 4 different podcasts on the screens to create my podcast cover art. Number 1 was The Diary of a CEO by Stephen Bartlett. Number 2 was On Purpose by Jay Shetty. Number 3 was Feel Better, Live More by Dr. Chatterjee. I used all 3 of these podcast covers and I compared what I liked about them, their colors, how their photo was placed on the podcast cover art, their font, and I thought, okay, this looks great. And I used that as inspiration to basically design my own. And if you look at mine right now, you will see that it's very, very similar. And of course, I got some inspiration from this. Now, to create your podcast cover art, you can easily use software such as Adobe. You can use Canva, which is also a great tool, or you can just hire a freelance designer to do it, which I did because it saved a bit of time and I wanted it a bit more professional. So I actually used Chukadu Designs, fantastic freelancer. He's also created a lots of different work for me on different sort of projects way before I started the podcast. I think that's very, very key or useful to get somebody that knows what they're doing. And prior to actually creating my podcast cover art, I actually took a photo shoot. Well, I had a photo shoot and I had around 4 different t-shirt colors, outfit changes, backdrops until we got the right one. So I did invest a bit into creating this art. As I said, I think it's important. You only technically have a podcast cover art once unless you want to change it, but not many people change it unless they've been running podcasts for quite a long time. So yeah, that's what I definitely recommend. Also, this is not mandatory, but you can create a logo if you wish. I created a logo. Again, this is part of my brand. So I got my designer or the freelancer to do it, and they created a logo, but I came up with the concept of valuable. I came up with the concept of having an icon logo as well as a text logo. That's why it all sort of fitted in well. Now we've basically planned the majority of your podcast, and yeah, you should be excited. You should have something tangible to actually go out now and record and edit your podcast. But you might want to consider a few different things, such as, are you going to have a website with your podcast, a blog page? Think about some of the social media. Do you want to save some of the handle names right now? So I'll definitely consider those things just to have it early in case, well, hopefully your podcast blows up and you secured that in good time. Now to the exciting stuff, recording and editing your podcast. I'm sure you've been waiting for this. You don't actually need expensive equipment or gear to create and record a podcast. If you want it to be very, very plain Jane, very simple, you can basically just use a mic from your laptop or your device, your phone, wherever you're recording from, and a pair of headphones, whether that's AirPods or any other headphones that are compatible with your devices. But of course, if you want to produce a podcast that's higher quality in audio, I'll recommend buying some equipment, which doesn't have to be crazy expensive, but there are different tiers. There are a range of different mics with a range of different prices. You can get on the low end, of just the mic that I have is the Samsung Q2U. I bought it around £60. It might be around £60 to £70 right now on Amazon. But it's great mic. It's a USB mic, meaning that I can plug it straight into my laptop and record. Great audio. Again, on the lower side, you can get a higher quality mic such as a Shure MV7 mic, which is on the higher side of things, £200 plus, or in between you can get a Blue Yeti mic or a Rode Pod mic, which is around £100. But again, I think if your sole aim is sort of to produce a quality audio podcast where people can still hear you and listen to you, and you don't want to break the bank whilst doing so, I think the Samsung Q2U is a great product to start with. What I also did is I bought headphones, so these bad boys over here. So these are called the Audio Technica M20X headphones, and why they're really good is that this mic I got here basically has a jack for headphones, so I plug it in straight into the mic. And why that's really, really useful is that I can hear myself speak in real time, really, really clear, crisp, so I know exactly what's going on. It helps cancel feedback and echoes as well. And also, if you did have any guests on your episode, then it's really good to hear them, as well as if you had any noisy stuff in the background, if you're doing it at home and you just had noise around you, having those headphones are really good to just hear whoever's on the other end and cut out all what's going on around you. Also, some extra accessories that you might want to get is a ring light. I've got a very mini ring light, but it does help to get the lighting better at some times. You might also want to get a boom arm. So a boom arm is basically, I don't have one, but it's those things where you attach the mic to, you can move it all around. So I guess it's quite useful if you don't want the stand, sort of the mini tripod on the mic, and you want to move the mic around and make it comfortable if you're moving around a lot. But I find it perfectly fine with the tripod. But again, this is all down to preference. After you've got your equipment sorted, you need a good platform to record your podcast online. And now, many people thought I started out using Zoom. That's incorrect. So Zoom is a software or platform where people do video calls. Now, you can record your podcast on Zoom, but the reason why I wouldn't recommend it is that the quality of the video is not that great. The audio as well is not technically suited for a high quality podcast. And one thing that I didn't like was the fact that when you record on Zoom and you get different guests, you can basically have a speaker view where it's just me and the guest will be in a small corner. But even if you did like put 4 people on the screen, it's quite difficult to in post-production create content, because you're going to have to chop up 4 different rectangles and enlarge them, losing quality, which is not great. So I actually use Zencastr to record, and I'm sure you guys know, or if you don't know, Zencastr is now official sponsor of the Valuable Podcast. And the reason why I'm telling you that is not because I'm trying to sell you Zencastr. I honestly started using Zencastr way before they became a sponsor. It just happened to be that they saw I was a very keen, passionate user, and they thought that they could support me and tell people like yourselves where to record a podcast. Their platform is great to do so. So what is Zencaster? Zencaster is an all-in-one, high-quality production podcasting platform. So what they do is they allow you to record both audio and video for your podcast from your house, and they allow you to record locally. So a lot of people don't know what that means, so I'll break it down for you. Locally recording means that when you record online, and let's say your Wi-Fi just crashes out or your laptop dies because it ran out of battery, and you're in the middle of recording your podcast, Zencastr automatically will save the files because they're recorded as a backup. So what that means is you won't actually lose what you've been recording, which I found really useful. Another thing that I love about Zencastr is about the audio. You have to care about the audio if you're making a podcast, because that's what podcasting is about. Zencastr records a 16-bit 48K WAV file. Now, what that basically means is they record high quality audio. It's not an MP3. If you have the pro account like I do, you can literally record the highest quality WAV file. And a WAV file is like, let's imagine you have a picture, a HD high resolution picture, and it's a certain amount of pixels, very high. That's what the WAV file's like. MP3 files like a compressed version of that picture. Still the same picture, but they just compress it a bit so you can send it on email, etc. But you get to record on Zencastr in just raw, clear audio, and then when you publish it, which we'll talk about, to different platforms, then you convert it into an MP3 so it can get distributed on different platforms. Zencastr also allows you to record in 180p HD. My laptop is actually not the best camera, 720p. I think most laptops are like that. I think most recent ones are probably higher. But what you can do is just buy a webcam, and that's exactly what I did. So I bought a webcam for around £18 on Amazon, which is a full HD webcam. So I attach it in order to record. Now, of course, recording this video, I'm not using a webcam, I'm using an actual camera, a Sony camera. But just to show you what it will look like once you buy the webcam, let's switch to that video. So now you can see the webcam. So this is using an £18 webcam. It's not that expensive. You can get higher quality ones if you want, but this records in HD. It does the job, and this is what it will look like in the comfort of your home, recording your video, recording your podcast. If it was a video podcast, if it's completely audio, that's absolutely fine, as there are many successful audio podcasts, and I actually launched my podcast as an audio to start with. Only now have I started to play around with some video. That's really cool that you can actually record in HD using Zencastr. Another thing I love is that they got automatic transcriptions. Please don't look over the transcriptions, because when you speak, it's actually quite useful for the whole episode to be transcribed, because one, you can just read it back if you don't want to watch it back. Two, when you actually sort of create content, which I'll talk about, it's very easy to find out what are the best bits in the episodes and what is the summary of the episode, and which I personally use. I actually use it as well to write some blog posts and to send out a weekly newsletter, which is really, really helpful. And there's just a ton of different features, right? You can create your intro, your outro in Zencastr. You can invite up to 4 different guests to record on Zencastr. What I do love is the fact that they have basically like rooms. So like if I was creating an episode, right? So I'll name it episode 1, how to start a podcast, and it's like you enter into a room. So let's say I wanted to create another episode. It's like I come out that room and I enter into another room, and you can just hit the button and record as many rooms as you want, but also as many recordings as you want. There is no time cap currently on Zencastr, meaning that after 4 hours you've cut the recording, right? You can literally, if you had the time of day, record 10 episodes in a day and just call it a day, just publish that for the next 2 months or so. So I think that's super useful and super handy. Also, another special feature is that it records audio and video files separately. Now you're probably thinking, why would it do that? That's really good, because let's say again that this was a guest podcast or you had a few different people on. If there is noise in my house or if there's noise in the background, etc., whilst my guest is speaking, that wouldn't show up on her audio file because it's separate. So it avoids sort of minuscule interruptions or anything that may interject or mess with the flow of your podcast episode. And what that does, recording the video separately, means that when you do sort of create content or post videos, you can just organize it however you want. You can use the video for whatever you want, which is what I really love about it. Now, I've been using it since publishing my first ever episode. That is 100% truth. What I did is you can pay for a pro account. So a pro account on Zencastr is $20 currently, but now they're an official sponsor of Valuable Podcast. They've actually given me a discount code for you guys to use, and you'll get 30% off a pro account for the first 3 months. So that brings it down to $14, and in pounds it's even cheaper. And just think about all the money that you save, because I know I save a lot of money, because one, I don't have like a £1,000 camera. I think on average to record a podcast audio in London, it costs around £50 an hour. So with video, it can be up to £100 an hour, £80 an hour is like the average. So imagine if I recorded 10 episodes, like, you know, spending nearly up to £1,000 if I went over an hour. So I generally save so much money using Zencastr. So if that's appealing to you, again, this is sort of focused on those who want to just get started, get something to publish, do it in the comfort of their home, and they're not thinking of high production studio, then I definitely recommend using Zencastr. And you can just click the link in my description and type in the code VALUABLE1 to get your first 3 months 30% off. And honestly, just try the free trial as well. You don't even have to pay straight away. You can just get a free trial and try it out yourself and let me know what you guys think. Lastly, the thing that Zencastr does, which is super useful, is that after you finish recording, you can basically go into post-production stage. And what that means is that you can automatically, using like AI and technology, get rid of hums, background noise, and merge your video into an episode ready to watch. Now, if you don't want to record video, absolutely fine. They allow you to download the audio files, again, merge it into one after post-production, or you can use a different editing software, which I'll get into. So you've recorded your episode, but you might need to do extra editing depending on how well you want the quality of your podcast to be, and whether you wanted to add in like different intros or highlights or snippets. There is an editing software you can use known as Audacity. So Audacity is a very, very popular tool. I use it because it's free, it's open source, meaning you can just download it straight onto your laptop, desktop, and you can use it. The only thing that I would mention first is that a lot of people also, they don't complain, but this is something just to be aware of, that the interface is quite old, so it's not the most modern software or tool to use. But again, it is free and it looks very, very technical to start off with, but there are lots of different capabilities and features that allow you to edit your podcast. So whether that's amplifying the volume, whether that's removing different specific bits you don't want in, whether that's making beep sounds, sound effects, fade in, fade out, whatever it is, Audacity can probably do it. Again, there's a library of videos that you can watch, tutorials, guides on how to use it to edit a podcast, which at first I did take a look at, but I was a bit time constrained, guessing that podcasting wasn't my main number one bag. It was sort of like a hobby thing I done on the side, a couple hours, so I didn't have that much hours to dive in to learn Audacity. So I actually looked up a different editing software known as Elitu. Now Elitu is a paid software which you guys can use. I personally use to edit my episodes from day one. And the reason why I like Elitu is that it literally cuts the time of editing down by so much. Why? Because it's another automatic editing software. So after I've downloaded my audio files from Zencaster, what I'll do is that I'll put it in Elitu, and it has like a little button where you can just click and it will link the audio files and merges it into two. Then I click another button and it automatically edits the audio to a professional studio quality. So what I mean by that, it literally, all the different technical things like the bass, the sound levels, all that stuff that not the common person that may start a podcast might know about, it does it for you, and it is really good. And what you'll just need to do next is just use their easy interface, very modern sort of software, just to cut out bits you don't want. You might not be too fast leaving in ums and ahs and other things. Some people are a bit more stringent on that, so you can just use that to cut out different things. And another thing about Elitu is that it has like a library of videos which helps you understand how to use it. And also, once you've uploaded a certain audio, it saves it in like a catalog, so you'll never actually lose it. And you can split up your podcast in segments. So like I said, let's say you did have an intro, you did have an outro, or you just had sections because you recorded in bits, right? I mean, for first-time podcasters, it's not that easy to just one take and you've got an amazing episode. Normally you might stop, you might pause. If that's the case, completely fine. What Elitu allows you to do is just basically, it's like build a bear but build a podcast. You slot in all the different parts of the episodes and you basically build it together. You can fade in, fade out, and it works really well. It saves me a lot of time when I edit my podcast. So using Zencaster to record, Elitu to edit, I can get a podcast ready to be published in the next 2 hours from recording it, which is really useful if you did want to save time. But it's also worth mentioning, you can have another option of hiring a freelancer to edit your podcast. So personally, I've not done that. I've always thought that I can either do it myself or find a software that can help me do it faster. But I get, if you sort of time constrained or you have the money to do so, you just want to pay someone to edit, you can do that. A lot of people use freelancers from Fiverr, freelancers from Upwork, or you might just use a company that you know. But I guess the only thing that I would say is that you might want to consider the time it might take to find someone really suitable, because if they're not recommended and you go straight with this person, you might find hiccups, whether that's cultural, language barriers, whether that's they didn't sort of get your vision. So you probably still spend a bit of time talking to them about how you actually want your podcast to be edited, and that might take a bit of time. And again, there could be sort of mismatch of expectations, but I'm sure if you're clear cut, you're crystal, you've wrote it down how you want this to be, different segments, etc., you can definitely outsource that as well. Finally, you've planned your podcast, you recorded your podcast, you've edited your podcast. All you need to do now is publish your podcast. And to publish your podcast, you need a company or organization to basically host your podcast and distribute it to all major platforms. Now, I host my podcast on Zencaster, the same platform that I record with, and I basically get to host my podcast for free because I'm part of the Creator Network and also being sponsored by them as of this recording. Now, there are many different companies that actually allow you to host a podcast as well, such as Acast, Anchor, Buzzsprout, and these platforms are also free for hosting your podcast. Hosting, what that basically means is with a click of a button, they'll distribute your podcast episodes to all the major platforms. That's just Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and all the major different platforms. And the way they do this is using something called an RSS feed, which is an individual URL link specific to you that hosts all your episodes. So think about it as a link that has a catalog to all your episodes. All you need to do is just give your RSS feed to a hosting provider, and they basically recognize all your episodes for them to send it out. So even if you're switching between different organizations, you'll always need an RSS feed in order for them to host your episodes and distribute it to the platforms that you require. Now, if you start out on any of the companies I just mentioned, or if you even happen to join the Zencastr Creator Network and then host there, you'll see that they'll automatically create an RSS feed for you, and all your episodes will be hosted and published. And if you're hosting on Zencastr or any other organization, what's really great is if they give you detailed analytics, which I get. So that's basically how many downloads are you getting per day, per week, per episode. So in the podcasting world, downloads are like the major things, and a download, there's different terms, but I guess industry standard on average is someone who's listened to your podcast for more than 60 seconds. So basically they're trying to figure out, is this an actual human being who's listened to your podcast and taken some value from it? So a download is sort of measured that way. And you can also get other analytics such as who's listening to your podcast, what geographic location are they in. You can get analytics such as a retention rate, how many people are listening to your episodes week after week. You can also get analytics such as what platform are they listening to? Are they listening to it on Spotify? Is 40% on Apple? What device? Is it Android? Is it iOS? So there's so many different sort of stats. So I'll definitely urge you to look into what sort of analytics comes with your hosting provider, as that can actually really help you gain some sponsors, which we'll talk about, and actually help you grow your podcast. Because once you figure out, when you look at the numbers, the data, you start to understand, oh, does it make sense that I post on a Monday? Oh, does it make sense that I post at 6 p.m. or 5 a.m.? Who's listening? Is there a growing audience? And I think that's really useful. Of course, I wouldn't say be crazy, focus on the numbers. They're not always 100% accurate per se. And what I mean by that is that a number won't necessarily tell you how you've impacted someone's life or how people are perceiving your podcast, right? Because you can get high amount of numbers, but just people they're just there because they heard about it, but they never come back, right? Or you can get a small amount of numbers, but it's really changing someone's life, or it's really enjoyable for your listener, for your ideal listener, which is at the end of the day exactly what you want. So I think it's great to know the numbers, but please don't beat yourself up on the numbers, because I'm sure every podcaster will tell you that the numbers are important, but listen, they're not that important where you stress over about it and you just end up not liking podcasting, which essentially is why you started. But that's it. Congratulations, you've officially created your own podcast from scratch. You've planned it, you've recorded it, you've edited it, you've published it. Now, all you need to sort of think about is creating some content and marketing your podcast to reach your ideal listeners and build your audience. So up until this stage, you've done the bulk of the work. So you've planned, you've recorded, edited, published. But now you just need to think about systems, like what can I do to better manage this process? Does that make sense? So what times am I going to edit? Am I going to edit after every episode? Am I going to batch edit? Am I going to batch record? Am I going to script every episode? Where am I going to keep the notes about my guests or notes about episodes? So what I recommend is a few different tools. So I use Notion to really manage this system, or build a system, should I say, for my podcast. And if you just see it, I've got a Notion page where I literally track my to-do list. What do I need to do to get this podcast out? Whether that's researching, whether that's recording, whether that's editing. And I think it's really key, because you need a system, right? You need to plan. Also, I use Google Drive to host all my different videos and different audios. So you definitely need somewhere to basically store all of your videos for your podcast, or all of your audios if it's audio only. And you can also use calendars such as Google Calendar. Personally, that's my favorite. That's my life. Everything in terms of the times I'm going to record, times I'm going to edit, times I'm going to research, times I'm going to plan. I put it in there. Even booking guests, right? I put it in my Google Calendar. I invite them, so it's in their Google Calendar, and it just makes everything more manageable. I think something I recommend you guys do. Otherwise, it might just get a bit hectic or frantic trying to manage your podcast as well as enjoy the process of creating one. Then you want to create content to actually get some eyes on your podcast. So I personally use Canva to post graphics. So whether that's me designing an episode cover, just saying, hey, I've just published a new episode, or that's posting content in written form, or that might be posting like an audio waves of a snippet of the episode. So I think Canva's a great tool. It's free to use. You can get the premium, but the free would suffice. I've been using Canva for years for free, and I've made so much different graphics, so much different templates with that. You can use a tool called Figma as well. So I actually use Figma to create some template backgrounds for my YouTube thumbnail. So when I was posting audio only, I thought it would be great to get a little YouTube thumbnail or background, should I say, where people can look at least my picture, the guest picture, the title of the episode, making it a bit more appealing. And also for video editing, if you do have video attached, I recommend using Veed.io. So this is a paid software, but I feel like it's really great if you want to chop videos into micro content. What I mean by that is like 60-second clips, 90-second clips. So this can be for your Instagram, your LinkedIn, Twitter, TikTok, and it can just be really to push out content for your podcast, so people can actually listen to it, see visuals if they please, and just really engage. Because at the end of the day, again, yes, it might be an outlet, hobby, fun. That's amazing, but how much more amazing if you're having fun and your audience is too, with the amazing content that you're making. So I definitely think it's something to consider. And you can also use Adobe. Again, many different Adobe packages that you can use to design content, edit videos, make reels, and all sorts. So if you know any more ones that I don't know, I'm sure there's lots of different apps, etc. Drop them in the comments and let us know what we can also use to create some phenomenal content around our podcast. Lastly, if you did have those extras that I talked about, such as a podcast website, which normally comes for free depending on the hosting provider you're using, they normally provide a free website for you. You can actually put some content on there, or you can build a mailing list like I did. So I use Ghost. Ghost is a paid software, around $11 a month, and I use Ghost to basically write my newsletters, draft them, publish them, build out my website. And the reason why I like Ghost and I use it and I do pay for it is because they have so many different features, so many different templates. To be honest, I'm underutilizing the potential that it has, because I've not got around to really enhancing what I can do. But so many different templates, whether you want to get like an article sort of template, whether you want to get sort of more so bloggy, whether it's just more so pictures. You might have a podcast about, I don't know, cooking or recipes, and you might want it to do like a recipe sort of blog. They have so many different templates, so many different color codes, so many different brandings. So you can also use Substack. So Substack is another software or platform, should I say, that you can basically build a mailing list, and Substack's completely free. And I think one thing I didn't mention, so Ghost and Substack, they actually have a option for you to actually monetize in the future. So if you did build up a subscribers list and you wanted to charge, I don't know, £3-4 a month, $5 a month, you can do that. But again, that Substack is free compared to Ghost, and pretty similar, so I would recommend it. Now, if you're about to post your content on social media, I believe that you should basically find out again where your ideal listeners are. It might not be on every single platform. You don't really need to post on 10 different social media accounts. You can actually just start off with 1, 2, or 3, which I did. So I only started posting on Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. YouTube only audio, LinkedIn occasional posts about my newsletters and blogs. Instagram, I posted some videos and some audio waves of snippets of the podcast, and I built up my audience that way. Why? Because I knew that's where my ideal listeners are. I definitely know I can get way more reach, and I'm actually expanding to post video on YouTube, more videos on TikTok and Twitter. I think the most important thing is just finding out where people listen and going to that platform, doubling down and getting some great content out there. That is my 10 detailed steps on how to start a podcast. I hope this was useful. I hope you've learned something new. I hope it was practical, digestible. You can actually use this information to start your own podcast. And if you do, let me know, and I would love to see your podcast launch.